It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead. Treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Lehrling.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Could you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
I've literally brought up this exact point to Kat as well, is that I'm like, in the experiences I've had where people are throwing a party and they say, come on over, now take off your shoes, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll take off my shoes or whatever. 99% of the time, it is just like the entryway to their house is just a shoe gala.
Graveyard.
You know what I mean? And there's nowhere to sit. There's no little bench for you to sit onto to put your shoes back on. So you either got to sit on the floor like a little kid trying to put your shoes back on. Give me a second, mommy. I got to put my shoes on. Like, or you're, like you said, you're hopping around on one leg going like, ooh, let me get my shoe on before I can get out of here or whatever. And you look like a buffoon hopping around. I don't know. The whole thing for me, again, it goes back to this thing of like, if you're going to have a party at your house and you're so concerned about your floor getting dirty,
what about just universal standards?
Maybe go somewhere else. Maybe go to a brewery, have it at a brewery or something like that, where people can just live their lives.
Okay, but I like the universal standard in Japan, which is any private building, shoes off. And there's a little step. When you walk into a Japanese house, there's a step that is ground level, and then one step that is higher, which is the nice, clean flooring, tatami or hardwood or whatever. And you sit on that step. You can take your shoes off. The shoes have a spot, and it's just a universal law. I think it's cleaner. I think it's nicer.
I'm okay with it. I will add one more caveat to this. Okay, If you are a shoes off household in America, and maybe Japan does this automatically, I don't know, you know better than me.
Yeah.
But if you're a shoes off household in America and you're having a bunch of guests come over, then you know what you got to do. You got to go find out where the airlines get their plastic wrapped little slippers that are cheapos, that are $2 or $3 a piece or whatever. And those are the things that your guests get to wear, because I'll be honest with you, my feet get cold. I'm walking around on the hardwood and my toesies are cold. And the whole time I'm walking around and I'm just going like, cool, I'm automatically uncomfortable because I'm walking around with cold feet.
For me, I am a boot wearer at all times.
Yeah.
Like if anybody passes me on the street, I will 9 times out of 10 be wearing a boot. And if I'm not wearing a boot, I'm still wearing something that goes up to my ankle, like Converse.
Sure.
So some shit marinates.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Is they're like, take off your shoes. I was like, I don't want to. And they're like, no, come on. I
used to be like that. I used to have a really stinky feet.
And I remember there was a girl that I was dating in high school named Kat, who was one of Chilena's friends back in high school. And first time I went over to her house, I was wearing my boots that I was previously doing some forging in. I'd just gotten into it at this time. And she asked me to take my shoes off. And I was like, no. And I was like, she was like, you have to. My dad says you have to. I was like, I'm not gonna. My feet smell bad. She's like, I don't mind how they smell. And I was like, that's weird. Like, pause.
I mean, maybe that's her thing. I don't know.
Either way, You know, like the fact that you're like, I'm willing to accept the fact that I will have to smell your feet, and I prefer that over you wearing your shoes. Kind of weird.
I understand.
Like chill, you know?
So you know how like a month or two ago I gave you all those socks, right?
Yes.
So as a teenager, I think it took me a long time to figure this out. Like a young adult, when I kind of figured it out, is that I was like, I can't wear the polyester socks because my feet will sweat. Yeah. And then that sweat marinates, gets funky, turns into athlete's foot. Then I got really stinky feet. And it was literally, there was a point when I was a teenager where my feet would get so stinky that even with my shoes on, you could smell my stinky feet. And I remember...
You could smell my stinky feet. I'm quoting that.
I remember we went to Northern California where a bunch of my family, like extended family lives. And I remember we went to my aunt's house and my aunt was like... Aunt Carol, she's like, dude, what's that smell? And I was like, she was like, is that your feet? And I was like, I think so.
But if you had shoes on, then it wouldn't have been a problem.
No, I had my shoes on.
Oh, well, then maybe you're just a teenage boy.
She had me take off my shoes. She sprayed them with Febreze and then washed my feet with Febreze.
That must have been so... my grandmother, Tanka, was... So if you ever watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right?
Oh, yeah. Great one.
Windex to them is rubbing alcohol to my grandmother.
Okay.
Every time I'd go to bed, and to be fair, I was kind of a wild child. I would run barefoot in the woods or whatever. She would rub my feet down with rubbing alcohol.
It's probably not a bad idea.
And for several years after I left my family household, I would keep a bottle of rubbing alcohol in the bedroom because like sometimes I don't want to take a shower and then boom, I'm clean. You know?
That's not true, but that's okay.
I'm sanitized from the ankle down.
Okay, from the... That's where you lost me. You're like, I rub alcohol on my feet, then boom, don't have to shower. That is not how showering works. Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Stinky Feet Akiva Miola.
You are the one with stinky feet. You just said that. Okay,
welcome, everyone. We'll get started on to Leonardo da Vinci Part 4 in just a second, but before we do, a couple little agenda items I wanted to go over. First and foremost, number one, if anybody out there is enjoying the show, I would humbly ask for your support on our Patreon page.
Yes, please.
It's just going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. As we've mentioned many times in the past, we are completely self-funded here, so any support is really going to help. And kind of right along with that, we mentioned it at the end of the last episode, but I'm trying to bring it up at the beginning over the next couple episodes. We are going to be launching a Kickstarter campaign for this exact reason, to help continue to fund the endeavor here. So that is just going to be kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. I'm thinking we're going to launch in August. I'm thinking mid-August, just to give us a little bit of runway time to hopefully get the word out before we actually get it launched. But again, if anybody is able to support us, that one will actually have reward tiers. We are going to have things like posters, signed posters, hats, stickers. There was some mention of Akiva maybe, and we haven't really gotten too far into it, but potentially making some knives for people. Yeah. Because that is what Akiva does full time beyond this. So just wanted to throw that out there for everybody in case you are able to offer us a little bit of support. And the last thing here before I'll hand things over to Akiva, wanted to give one more shout out to my Aunt Carol and her Etsy shop. We mentioned in the last episode that she makes all different types of jewelry, bracelets, and most recently she's been making these clip-onable hat feathers.
From a bird sanctuary, no less.
Yeah, she's not ordering these things online. She's actually collecting these bird feathers herself from all these gorgeous, amazing, rare and exotic birds, peacocks and pheasants and guinea fowls and all kinds of crazy stuff. If anybody out there wears like a brimmed hat, kind of Western style hats, I'm telling you, 99% of the time in my experience, hat shops will have like, buy a feather for $4. These are actually like, I don't know how to describe it, but they're
nice.
They're gorgeous,
really nice.
And they're clip-onable, so you can kind of like swap them out with other ones that you get. So go check out her shop. It's just going to be etsy.com/shop/jackmystyle. It's exactly what it sounds like, JACKMYSTYLE, Jack My Style. Again, etsy.com/shop/jackmystyle. Go help support my Aunt Carol there. With that, take it away, Akiva, if there's anything, unless you wanted to add anything else. I
think we're okay.
Cool.
Yeah. So in the last episode of The Biographers, we explored the first half of Leonardo da Vinci's time in the court of Milan. First applying to become a war engineer, Leonardo was chosen to become the impresario, coordinating plays and working as a court entertainer. Originally hustling for work, Da Vinci would paint the Virgin of the Rocks with his studio mates, only to have his customers back out and him have to repaint it later. As a court entertainer, Leonardo would become close friends with the great minds of Milan and would use this to gain access to ancient sources available only to academia, such as the work of Vitruvius. This led him to adopt a key ideal of humanism, that the human body is a microcosm of the universe and can be divided into divine proportions. Later, Leonardo would be asked to paint Ludovico Sforza's mistresses, and he was so impressed that he granted Leonardo full patronage in exchange for taking on his biggest project yet, a 24-foot-tall bronze statue of Francesco Sforza riding a gigantic warhorse. This gave him access to resources he only dreamed of, having a full retinue of assistants and a studio all to himself.
And this also gave him the idea to make the Vitruvian horse, for lack of a better term, right?
Yes, Vitruvian horse, Vitruvian man, just dividing everything by its own members.
Finding the proportions of everything.
Yeah, cool. Universal proportions, you know.
And before we get started too far into this, I'll also drop the plug for anybody that wants to see these pictures and images that Akiva has been talking about through the series. Go to our website, thebiographerspodcast.com. On the homepage there's going to be a thing that says Leonardo da Vinci, our current series, and there's a link to the companion images. So go check that out.
Absolutely, yeah. So we pick up now with Leonardo's preparation for the Sforza horse. We first discussed his dive into the anatomy of horses and men, going from surface study to help better understand his subjects to full-on medical codexes that explored the bones, nerves, and muscles of dissected subjects. At this point, Leonardo had made dozens of drawings, playing with the positioning of the statue, but he needed to bring his art into the real world. Moving to the mechanical side of his brain, Leonardo would have to tackle a far more practical challenge, casting a 70-ton horse and moving it to its final position. So, the traditional way to make something this big would be to cast it in separate panels and then braze the pieces together. If you've ever visited Japan, they have the Golden Buddha statue in Nara is done this way.
Okay.
Essentially, like you put the first level of molds. Let's say I'm doing a Buddha. I would put his legs crossed over one another. That would be about 10 feet tall. Those would be all of the molds. You would cast that and then put the next set of molds on top of that and then pour more bronze.
Okay.
While this did work, it did show imperfections between the panels, and, it was very hard to kind of blend those areas. So Leonardo wanted to cast this 24-foot monstrosity in one piece.
Jesus.
So one pour, one piece, one horse, all in one go, right? So the first and most obvious issue would be the sheer quantity of bronze that was needed to be poured all in one go. So Leonardo drew plans for a new casting yard with 4 gigantic furnaces that would surround the central mold in a circle, with crews of foundry workers to operate complex rigging that would hoist the crucibles and clear blockages with iron scrapers. So as you pour bronze, if you overheat it or if there are any imperfections in it, something builds on the top of it called swarf or scum, essentially. There's a more technical term for it, but I can't remember it. Anyway, sort of burnt up, crusty bits. These people would have to make sure that none of this is getting into the horse because they're all pouring it in one go. So they have to make sure that the bronze that's being poured into the mold is completely pure.
It's wild.
So in order to reduce the weight and material used, Leonardo opted to use a lost wax casting system, which we still use to this day. Leonardo would have to build a clay model, which would first be used to make a mold, which would then be filled with wax poured in layers. Once the wax was thick enough, the inner torso of the horse would be filled with clay and rubble. When they poured, the molten bronze would be hot enough to evaporate the wax, taking its place and filling the mold. The clay and rubble would prevent the torso from filling up with bronze, wasting sort of precious metal, and once the casting was done, it would be emptied out of a porthole that would be covered up by the sculpture of the rider on the top of its back. So this would not be solid bronze, which is another testament to its size. It's 70 tons, right, of hollow bronze.
Okay.
So
it's just that thin little layer, basically.
So you would make like almost like a smaller version of the horse out of rubble and clay on the inside. Then you would put wax over the top of it, and then you would make, a mold over the outside, And then as you pour in the bronze, the small horse on the inside fills the void so the bronze doesn't fill up in the belly of the horse or inside of the head of the horse. And just the outer layer of it is all bronze because the wax would instantly evaporate and the bronze would take its place, right?
So a similar process to, and you know more about this than me, so correct me if I'm wrong, jewelry making.
Yes. Same thing that we do with rings. If you want to make a wedding ring, a lot of the times people will use this green wax called casting wax, carve the ring out, put it inside of a mold, heat it up so that all of the wax burns out of the mold, and then you're just left with the empty void to pour the silver in or the gold or whatever.
Cool.
So originally, Da Vinci had hoped that he would be able to bury the mold upside down and pour the bronze into the belly of the horse, allowing the legs of the mold to be used to vent the gas that would come from the evaporating wax.
Oh, clever.
Yeah. So imagine like the legs being kind of chimneys in a way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Leonardo would have to abandon this plan in 1493 because his statue was so gigantic that the pit required would reach the water table.
Whoa.
So in order to put this horse upside down, it would essentially create a well, and then, it would cause vapor explosions if the molten bronze came in contact with the water.
Oh my gosh.
So, like, if they poured it just without him thinking of that step, it would have just caused a massive explosion and everything would have been ruined. So
I'm surprised, though, that it wouldn't have been like, let's call an audible and then go to a mountainside and dig into the top from the mountain or something like that.
Yeah, but then how do you transport 4 furnaces, 4 crews of foundry makers, and enough bronze for a 70-ton horse statue, and then transport that finished statue all the way back to Milan? It had to be done close to the site that it was going to be placed.
You're not wrong, but how'd they build the pyramids?
Because the quarries were right there, and they rolled all the stones over there.
I don't think so.
How did Jack Daniel get his safe over across the highway? It took him 3 months to get this one safe.
6 months or something like that.
Kind of a similar story with this horse.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Is that you're like, how do you do that? Well, with lots of time and manpower is how you do it.
Yes.
Yeah,
and he. This project had to be done before, Ludovico's grandkids died. So,
touche.
Whereas, you had the entire life of the pharaoh to produce his pyramid. A lot of the times they would start when the pharaoh was born. So one of my favorite design pieces from his drawings was for something he called a casting hood, which looked something like a Hellraiser torture device that would go around the head of the horse. Knowing that the amount of bronze being poured was so heavy that it could buckle and warp the mold, Da Vinci made a support cage out of iron that would, wrap around each part of the mold.
Oh, wow.
Think of like a cage that goes over the head of the horse, keeping the mold in place. Having worked in fabrication myself, it takes kind of a special person to draft a design that would work exactly as it should with no changes when it's built. Modern casting people would have been like, yeah, that's completely viable. Sort of, it's almost like how we use rebar on the inside of highways in order to keep everything in place.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So, and if you're interested in any of the images, we have a little diagram of lost wax casting and a casting hood because it's kind of hard to visualize in your head if you've never seen it.
Sure.
After 2 full years dedicated to drafting the design, it was time to set the plan in motion. Leonardo finally began to sculpt the horse in clay at its full scale, and in 1493, his work was revealed to the public. It was presented to celebrate the wedding between Beatrice's niece and her husband, who was soon to become the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. And the reactions were insane. Da Vinci not only rendered the horse perfectly, but he also created a statue in gigantic proportions, being the largest that many of the guests had ever seen. I think from what I understand, my research, I could be wrong, this was the largest horse statue made in bronze in the world.
Wow.
Right? Like a 7 wonders type of situation.
But not necessarily the largest statue.
Yeah.
But maybe the largest single cast statue.
Yes. Now, he hadn't casted it yet. This is just the clay mold that he's presented.
Ah, okay.
Right? And the clay mold is to scale. So it's still gigantic.
Right.
In fact, one of the onlookers, poet Baldassare Taccone, writes, quote, "Neither Greece nor Rome ever saw anything grander," which... Da Vinci was considered to have surpassed his ancient ancestors, and knowing how much these guys loved ancient Rome, this was a huge deal.
I mean, that's like saying he surpassed the Parthenon.
Yes. Yeah, they're saying Rome has never seen anything better than what Da Vinci has made.
And they made the Colosseum.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's insane.
Yeah. So people from all across Italy would talk about the man from Vinci and his colossal warhorse. It would travel to far off regions like India, the conversation of this statue. Now, Leonardo was finally ready to begin the casting process after this sort of grand debut, but unfortunately, in 1494, the turbulent world around him would put his work to a stop. That same year, the French king Charles VIII would begin his invasion through Italy, striking the town of Ferrara, 160 miles away, which was run by Ludovico's father-in-law. In order to show support, Ludovico would have to send the bronze reserved for the statue to Ferrara to make cannons. So the statue never got casted.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so Ludovico agreed to keep him under tenure until he could finish the monument, but Leonardo felt completely resigned, writing, quote, "Of the horse, I will say nothing, for I know the times."
He's basically saying, we'll do the thing, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah. He's like, I understand what's going on right now. I know you want to get the horse done, but I know that there's a war coming, and we're going to need every ounce of bronze that we can get.
So the horse was never made?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's a long story. I know I've been dragging through two episodes about the story of the horse.
You're killing me with this horse statue, man.
Yeah. Well, the story of the Sforza horse comes to a pause. Leonardo's mind for engineering has truly been sparked by his work during his time preparing for casting, and he would dive deeper into the gears and springs that had fascinated him all his life. In the same sense that he, got into human dissections by getting into horse dissections, by studying the horse, studying the mechanisms of how to cast this thing, made him just start to study mechanisms in general, which made him invent a bunch of other random stuff that had nothing to do with the horse at all.
Cool.
So what made Leonardo's machine drawings truly special was his technique for illustrating moving parts. Engineers at the time would draw everything assembled, but Leonardo would develop the drafting style inventors use to this day called exploded form. If you've ever looked at a diagram of like an airplane or a ship, this showed the machine fully disassembled with each component on display, hovering next to where it would fit in.
And then like the little, so if it was a wheel and it needed to have a bolt going through it and then a screw on the end of it, it's like the line,
a dotted line,
goes through all three of them going like, this is how they fit together.
Yes.
It for anybody that needs a better visual, imagine any of those like
IKEA
or Discovery Channel documentaries where they're like, this ancient war machine was made like this, and they show it completed, and then it all literally looks like it's blowing up, but it's not. It's just it's separating all the components out. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. No one had ever done this.
Cool.
Everybody had always just maybe drawn photos or pictures of each individual part, and then all of it assembled. But no one had taken apart the car so the mind's eye could see each and every piece.
So Da Vinci literally invented this entire idea.
Yeah.
So this is, Akiva, if you haven't figured this out about me yet, this is the stuff that makes me the most excited about history, is when you learn something that happened, whether it be 100 years ago or 500 or 600 years ago, and you go, no, that thing that we still use right now, that happened back then.
Yeah.
You can feel the echo of it that keeps going through the generations and through the centuries, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
We've talked about it before, but when can we say that history, an event ever stopped? When can we say that a historical thing ever ended? Because the influence is endless.
Right.
People who are in engineering school right now are drawing things in exploded form in CAD or on paper when they're doing drafting practices, and they might not even know that Da Vinci was pretty much the first person ever to do this. In fact, another thing to add is, I didn't add this in the script, but he also, during this time, created a wheel lock for pistols. So when you look at like a musket and that sort of wheel that turns back to strike the flint.
Yeah.
That was his invention.
Where it goes click, click, basically?
Yep. Because before people would, like with a cannon, you'd have to, put a flame right on the gunpowder in order to set it. But with him, he was like, we could just use a spring, cock it back, and then when you press a trigger, it flies forward, lights a spark, and then, that's a trigger mechanism. Da Vinci invented that. He was just hanging out with one of his friends who was a gunsmith.
Wow.
The two of them were just like kind of riffing off of each other, and he's like, what do we do this?
And maybe you'll get into this, so I can potentially cut this out. But if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it Da Vinci who also invented the ball bearing?
We don't have to cut it out, but yeah, he actually gets into that right now.
Oh, perfect. Then here we go.
Ball bearings did exist at the time, but they weren't really used in popular application.
Okay.
Because he kind of had a better understanding of like things like friction and stuff. So one of his favorite puzzles to solve was to see if he could make a mechanism move at a constant pace. See, Coil springs were a very popular method of powering mechanisms, but they start off with lots of tension and gradually lose power, making things like clocks unpredictable since they would eventually slow down. This issue was on the minds of engineers across the Renaissance world, and Da Vinci was able to solve this using a gear that twisted upwards in a spiral, allowing the gradual change in angle to evenly disperse the power. Leonardo would also become famous for improving a source of power that built the modern world. So when we imagine a workshop setting during the Renaissance, it's often believed that craftsmen did everything by hand. But at this time in history, paper mills, blacksmiths, flour mills, and even gunsmiths would have power tools. The power didn't come from electricity, but instead water. Situated next to the Arno River would be dozens of water wheels, which at the time used a series of flat paddles to harness the force of the current. Think the bicycles in SpongeBob, right? Just straight flat paddles.
Okay.
The water wheels would rotate, spinning large belts that hung across the workshops for people to attach their machines to. So think like a giant spinning belt like you would see in a car, but it would be, in the rafters of this shop, and then you could attach machines to this belt in order to power them, right? Da Vinci would make an upgrade to the wheel using his knowledge of hydrodynamics, adding swinging buckets which would fill up each time they dipped into the stream and dump it out as it reached the other side.
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So this would add more force to each rotation, allowing mills to run off of slow currents or even tiny streams.
Wow.
So if you go to different blacksmith shops in, Germany, for instance, Otto's visited a couple when he was studying to be a blacksmith. A lot of these water wheels are running off of streams that you're like, there's no way that there could be any power coming from this.
It's because of the weight basically from these buckets.
Exactly.
Wow.
Da Vinci was able to say, this stream is like, the width of a person, but if we add more inertia to each rotation of this wheel, we can still power hammers.
That's insane.
So from his study of the water wheel, Leonardo would begin to understand a force he called impetus, where he would write, quote, "A body in motion desires to maintain its course in the line from which it started."
Okay.
Once again, Leonardo would beat Isaac Newton to the punch, this time discovering the law of inertia 200 years early. So if you remember in episode 1, we talked about equal and opposite reaction. Figured that one out in Florence. Now he figures out inertia.
Wow.
This idea of inertia sparked pages of designs meant to spin forever, now called perpetual motion machines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So some of these involved water screws, gears, and weights, all trying to keep an object at the same speed forever. Now that he understands a body in motion wants to stay in motion, right? Despite the fact that other scientists would keep trying to make perpetual motion for another 300 years, Da Vinci would give up shortly after because he discovered something that they didn't. Friction. So through his study of air resistance with birds and experiments, involving sliding different objects off of angles, Da Vinci would also find ways to fight friction, such as building his designs with easy access for lubrication, as well as using ball bearings.
I was waiting for it.
Once again, Leonardo never published any of his findings.
Oh my gosh.
It's likely that he hoped to organize everything into a perfect book before he shared his discoveries with the world, and he got too bored or too distracted to finish it. This guy, if we've been talking about the same 5 years for 2 episodes, so it's very likely.
He's on a tear right now, basically.
Yes, it's very likely that he was just like, okay, next thing. So now he's around 43 years old, and Da Vinci would be pulled out of his notebooks to create one of his most famous works yet. All right.
I'm not even going to say it, but I have a feeling.
Okay. So in 1495, the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie would ask for Da Vinci to produce his largest painting yet on their refectory wall, spanning about 15 feet tall and 28 feet wide.
Whopper.
The scene to be placed there would be Jesus and his disciples sitting around a table for Sabbath the night before his crucifixion. The Last Supper would be one of the most important works Leonardo da Vinci would ever finish and is now considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site along with the Statue of Liberty, Taj Mahal, and the Great Wall of China.
And maybe most importantly, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code.
What's really funny is we actually did some research on the Da Vinci Code thing, and a lot of what they're talking about is completely opposite of they're always talking about how Da Vinci tended to be really good at drawing men in the Da Vinci Code. And it's like, no, the opposite. If anything, people said that he feminized women too much.
Well, that is a part. I read the Da Vinci Code. That was a big part of it, is basically all of these instances where they're saying this is a man, it actually is a woman, or vice versa kind of a thing. So anyways, we can move on.
Yeah. So for the listeners, this will be our deepest analysis on a painting yet. And while I hope it's not necessary, you can follow along with our image list on the biographer's website. So to be honest, I wasn't even slightly interested in The Last Supper. As a Jewish person, I was never raised around the stories of the New Testament, so I didn't think I could get very invested in Da Vinci's biblical paintings, which there are a lot of.
It's fair.
So after researching it, though, I kind of got to see how, even if you aren't a Christian, Da Vinci tells the story of betrayal in a universal and very human way. So I hope I can get you to think differently about a boring sort of church mural.
Religious painting.
Yeah. It's here that we get to see a peek of what Leonardo's unfinished Adoration of the Magi was hoping to achieve. Instead of a painting of Bible characters who seem self-aware of their part in the play, The Last Supper gives us a snapshot of the most critical moment of the story, capturing the very moment after Jesus tells his dinner guests that one of them will betray him.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So this dramatic news is what we're seeing spread across the faces of every character, with each of them reacting according to their own personality and calling. Now, looking at the scene, it might be wrong to say that it serves as a freeze frame, but more so as the reactions of each of his disciples in the first few seconds after the news, with time moving forward across the painting from left to right. So
it's like a piece of film.
Yeah. So, not like, in Baroque or in photography, the shot of Michael Jordan, dunking the net. This is the shot of him dunking. And then also a couple seconds after that, seeing the reaction of the crowd. And then a couple seconds after that, seeing them win the game. I don't play sports. This is a terrible analogy for me to use. But this isn't just 1 second. This is progressing from I just heard what Jesus said to, oh my God, what do we do, to what's going on.
It reminds
Chaos.
me of like, if there's a clip of a bunch of friends that are all hanging out and one dude, they're like playing basketball, for example, and one dude lands a swish and then just stands there and stares at the camera looking like, you know what I just did, kind of a thing. And all of his friends come running and go, oh man, they're shaking him. But he doesn't move. He's just standing there staring into the camera or whatever.
That is Jesus.
It feels like this is what's happening. Jesus is the guy that did the swish. And then we're looking at a strip of film as his friends are slowly running into frame to shake him and do this. It's like that.
We talked about this with Lady with an Ermine. The idea of just objectively illustrating what we see with our eyes is not there at this time. Pictures, images, cameras do that. People don't do that. People don't see with just their eyes. That's why if you've ever taken a drawing class and you're drawing somebody, especially somebody that you like I can't draw my wife because I love my wife and I see more than what I'm seeing with my eyes. And that makes it very hard for me to do that. It's the same thing that goes with time. Da Vinci would not see time as things that could be divided into even sections. He sees it as you can infinitely slow down a moment.
It's cool.
Right? So beginning at the very first moment, we see a face of interest and confusion on the faces of his disciples, Bartholomew, James, and Andrew.
Bartholomew?
Bartholomew. I can't say that. Bartholomew? Am I saying it?
Bartholomew. Yeah.
Okay.
You're good.
So as the moment of confusion goes across the room, we see Peter, John, and Judas on the left side of Jesus. Judas, the person who ratted him out, is silently clutching his bribe money with his jaw clenched in anger. Next to him, Peter looks agitated, as if he's asking Jesus who the culprit is, where the gentler John is depicted to be resigned, knowing that there's nothing he can do. The other end of the table, however, has burst into chaos. Remember, this is further in time, with bodies twisted and gestures flying, with Matthew, Thaddeus, and Simon in further disarray. Jesus, however, seems to be in his own bubble of time, sad but content that he can fulfill his role of forgiving people of their sins. So, getting out of the theology of the painting, my main source, Walter Isaacson, puts it perfectly, saying, quote, Italy was then, as now, a nation of hand gesture enthusiasts. Yeah, so Leonardo knew this perfectly, and he would put together a study he would call Moti dell'anima, or motions of the soul. In this expressive world of Italy, Da Vinci wanted to encapsulate feelings through body language more than anything, writing, quote, "A picture of human figures ought to be done in such a way the viewer may easily recognize by means of their attitudes the intentions of their mind." So Leonardo, as we talked about in the last episode, spent years being roommates with the deaf artist Cristoforo de Predis, and he would play a huge role in the gestures he used for the Last Supper. Leonardo would write pages of shorthand gestures to convey the intention of his characters. A lot of the times he would just go to dinner and look at an argument and dissect the body language of each person, whether it's the person who's quietly listening, trying to be polite, being argumentative. For instance, if you wanted to show someone who thinks they're right in an argument, have them with one hand pointing into the other with their index finger right at the center of their palm. Right?
Like finger in palm kind of a thing. Like, hey, let me tell you something.
Let me
right
tell
now.
you something. Yeah. Right? If he's sitting down, have the aggressor lean forward like he's about to get up while he's talking. If it's disbelief you want, Leonardo might use a good mano a borsa, or finger purse. That's the typical Italian gesture, twisting your fingers all together to a point, which he writes in his thing.
All I guess they used it is a New Yorker going, "Hey, I'm walking here.
I'm walking here, mamma mia, that type of thing, right? Now, one of my favorite anecdotes about this time painting the Last Supper comes from Leonardo's customer, the prior of the convent. For the first years that Leonardo spent working on the painting, the priest would write, quote, "Leonardo would come in here the early hours of the morning and mount the scaffolding and then remain there, brush in hand, from sunrise to sunset, forgetting to eat or drink, painting continually. At the end of the day, he would remain in front of it for 1 or 2 hours to contemplate in solitude, examining and criticizing himself." And by the way, while he was doing this, there was a crowd.
He was painting in front of a crowd.
Oh, yeah. People, at this point, remember, he's famous. He is the theater guy. He is the guy who made the horse monument that's better than anything that we saw in Rome. So people are gathering from all over the place to watch the Last Supper be painted, including the friars of the convent, who I'm sure took their lunch breaks. Well, they did take their lunch breaks here because that's where they eat lunch.
It's strange to think, by the way. I knew that the Last Supper was large, but imagining somebody on scaffolding to paint it, gives it a whole new perspective.
Feet long, man.
And 15 feet high. That's what I'm saying. It's amazing.
High. Yeah. It's like the side of a single floor house.
It's basically a mural.
Yeah, it is. Now, as Da Vinci's ADHD began to kick in, the prior would later write that Leonardo would, quote, "climb the scaffolding, seize a brush, apply a brush stroke or two to one of the figures, and suddenly depart." So Leonardo had only 2 faces left to finish at the time that he was kind of being a little lazy, but the prior would eventually get sick of his behavior, asking for an audience with Ludovico Sforza to try to get him to speed it up. When confronted by the two, Leonardo would say, quote, "Men of lofty genius sometimes accomplish the most when they work the least," which is... he's totally bullshitting, and I love it. And I'm so glad that they were like, yeah, you know what? He's really smart. Totally.
This is what I think I try to tell my wife often. Hey, it may look like I'm not working, but I'm actually doing a lot of work right now in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, playing this game is really helping me focus on making money, finding a good job to work on next, that type of thing.
I know it looks like I'm sitting here in nothing but my boxers scrolling through TikTok, but in reality,
this is market research. We're making TikToks. No. After this, he also mentioned that he was having a hard time finding a model for Judas, and he'd be happy to use the priest's face if he kept complaining.
Hey, man, watch what you're saying or I'm going to make you Judas.
Yeah, literally. And I mean, at that time, that's a big thing. So the priest would promptly shut up after this, hoping that Leonardo wouldn't immortalize him as the betrayer of Jesus.
It's a good threat.
It is a very good threat. I'm pretty sure Michelangelo did something similar, I want to say. Either that or maybe they've conflated the stories, but there's lots of stories of people being like, "Oh, you want to be Judas? Okay, then shut the fuck up."
I know you haven't watched it, but there's a point in Parks and Recreation where they're like all the office workers are trying to identify the other office workers' spirit dogs, right? So like Leslie Knope, who is Amy Poehler, she's like a golden retriever because she's all, super hyped up, or Aussie Shepherd, something like that. And there's one of them, Larry, and he's like, guys, do you really think we should be doing this? And Billy Eichner's character goes, Larry, shut up, or I'm going to make you, I think it's like a Yorkshire Terrier or something like that. I can't remember what the exact dog was, but it's like this little yappy little dog. And he goes, is that bad? And he goes, yes!
And it's so funny, too, because, like I said, only 2 more faces to finish. But this prior's like, come on, I want him to finish. And it's like, dude, this is Leonardo da Vinci. Shut up. Get out of here. Now, while Da Vinci had spent years learning the nature of light, dissecting eyes, and writing diagrams, the Last Supper was a particular challenge. Normally, Leonardo said a painting is best viewed around 20 times the width of the painting so that the lens of your eye can see everything in flat perspective without warping. Right? If he were to do that now, it would make the viewing spot for his mural 300 feet away. So there was no way, actually, correction, 3,000, I mistyped that, 3,000 feet away. So there's no way to depict this in real proportion. Instead, Da Vinci would invent what he calls complex perspective. To solve this, which was, kind of using geometric trickery to keep everything in perspective. We kind of saw a little bit of this on sort of a failed attempt in the Annunciation when he was still in Florence. If you remember, with the Mary with the extra long arm, that type of thing. This time, he really succeeds at this. When Leonardo first started laying lines for the Last Supper, he placed a nail where Jesus's head would eventually be, having all of the perspective lines of the walls converge at that center point. This meant that if a viewer stood on the left side of the painting, the wall of the actual real convent would line up with the wall of Jesus's dining room. And the same goes if you're standing on the opposite side. Also, in order to make it seem even more real, the angle of light that Da Vinci uses for the painting comes from the same direction as the church's actual window. You hear a lot of people being like, oh, Last Supper's not good. They're all sitting on one side of the table. The perspective is all weird. You're not in the room. If you were in the room, you can see that it actually makes sense. If you watch videos of people going to visit this, and you're standing on the left side, it just looks like the wall is continuing into the painting.
Cool.
Which is really cool. In the end, the painting was an absolute success, and like Leonardo's horse, was considered an Italian wonder. In 1498, Leonardo would complete his mural and not only be paid in full, but also be rewarded with a vineyard near the church, which he kept for the rest of his life. Right? So it wasn't long ago that a church asked him to do something similar, and with the same reward, and instead of getting firewood and a wine bill, Da Vinci would actually get to enjoy the fruits of his labor, pun intended.
I was like, you weren't going to say it, I was.
Yeah, because the first time they're like, make us adoration. He was like, yeah. And they're like, we'll give you a vineyard. And he's like, yeah.
And then he didn't finish it. And they were like, all right, here's some wood and you got to repay us for the wine.
Yeah. But this time he actually finished it. I think it's like the theater experience and actually being on the clock, working for somebody like Ludovico Sforza. You had to kind of have results.
I also feel like if you're at this point where you have an audience of people staring down the barrel of your work, you probably are like, yeah, shoot, I got to get this done. I can't.
True.
And it's got to be good too, because they're all expecting it to be good at this point. Now it's not just for me. It is everybody is looking at me to do
getting
this.
Free peeps. I think about that all the time. Imagine yourself in that situation and you're like, I just got done grinding the sword. I've got a little bit of time to spare. Let me get my nice clothes. I'm going to go see Leonardo paint the Last Supper.
Yeah, dude.
While I'm eating my lunch.
That's like TV of the day.
That's insane just
That's
to think
crazy.
about.
Did you catch that last episode of Leonardo painting?
Yeah.
It's great, man.
It's great.
He put
the
in
last
the
episode
hair.
was so short. It was all filler. He only painted one thing and then
he just stood there. It was not exciting.
It's basically just watching Dragon Ball Z,
Have you heard? I think maybe you told me this. Isn't there an abridged version of Dragon Ball Z?
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to try to get through that. So before we leave the Last Supper to go on to Leonardo's sort of longtime pursuits, I want to talk to you about what this thing has dealt with since it was first made. As an aside, if you've been following us on Instagram, you'll know that Leonardo did have one major unresolved issue with his work, which is he loved to experiment with pigments. For typical fresco painters, they had to paint while the plaster was still wet in order for it to bond to the wall properly, giving them a short window to work. Leonardo did not want to be rushed with this process, so he chose to lay on countless thin layers of tempera and oil paints. Within just 20 years, the painting would begin to degrade, getting so bad that the monks thought it was fine to renovate over it, cutting off Jesus's feet with a door frame that they put right below it.
Oh my gosh.
It gets worse. In the 1700s, after someone tried to protect the painting with a coat of varnish, another artist would strip it all off and paint over the original art.
With like a brand new painting?
Not a brand new painting, but they were like, oh, I bet you I could touch it up. The public protested and finally got the man to stop, but only 3 of the faces are in their original state now.
Oh, wow.
During the French Revolution, anti-clerical forces would scratch the eyes out of the apostles, and then the building was used as a prison.
Apostles, you mean?
Did I not say that? Apostles?
Apostle.
Apostle? Is it with an L or no?
There's no T.
But
the T is silent.
Is it?
It's apostle.
Well, I'm Jewish. I don't care.
I know. I'm just letting you know.
But anyway, these guys would scratch out the eyes of everybody in the painting besides Jesus.
And use the place as a prison?
And then use the place as a prison.
Like actual prison?
Actual prison.
Holy hell.
Yeah. And it gets worse, too, because the Last Supper would almost see the end of its days in World War II when a bomb dropped, exploding the building. Luckily, someone was smart enough to surround it in sandbags, protecting it from fate once again.
Holy crap. Good on them.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So degrades in 20 years. Somebody scratches the eyes out. Somebody paints over the faces. If you look at it now, there was a very tasteful reconstruction done where they used sort of a transparent paint over the areas that had been ruined, being like, this is where we think Leonardo painted, right?
Wow.
So you can still get the image, but like if you visited in the 1950s, it would just been like a crumbling mess.
Jeez.
Right after,
and this is in still in Milan, right?
Yes, this is in Milan.
I mean, look, I'm no World War II history expert or anything like that, but I guess I didn't realize that Milan was bombed in World War II.
Yeah, I didn't either. Like when they were like, oh yeah, it almost blew up. I was like, what?
I mean, obviously I knew there was fighting in Italy and everything. I just didn't know that it was to that extent. That's really crazy.
To the extent where it almost ruined the Last Supper.
It's crazy.
Now, before we conclude Leonardo's time in Milan, there's still one dream that he was still pursuing during his entire time working for Ludovico Sforza: flight. Leonardo had been able to figure out the law of equal and opposite reaction back in Florence, studying birds, and through his mechanical studies, began to learn the law of inertia and friction as well. Unlike many at the time, Leonardo knew that birds were creatures that worked within the laws of physics, writing, quote, "A bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law, and it is in the capacity of a man to reproduce such an instrument. A man with wings large enough and duly attached might learn to overcome the resistance of the air and raise himself upon it." That's right. It's at this point that Leonardo da Vinci would take his first stab at making humans fly through the air. Wow. So
like Batman.
I know we saw like a couple little toys. We saw like the helicopter idea, but there was no real way to spin it. Now we're like, birds obviously work because of everything that I know about air, and we could just make a human-sized bird and people could fly.
Birdman.
So the first key to Leonardo's success had been found, but he needed to conquer an issue he ran into. If the law of equal and opposite reaction is true, wouldn't the flapping of wings push you down as much as it lifted you up? Leonardo needed to find a model to understand aerodynamics. In this same codex, he writes, quote, "To explain the science of flight, it is necessary to explain the science of the winds, which we shall prove by the motion of the waters." His first big breakthrough would be his discovery that while water is practically impossible to compress, air can be pressurized. He writes, quote, "If the air could not be compressed, the birds would not be able to support themselves by the air that is struck beneath their wings." With an understanding of compression under his belt, Leonardo would then go on to mark off Galileo's principle of relativity in one simple sentence, writing, quote, "The behavior of a moving pole through still water is the same as a stationary pole in moving water."
Oh.
Right. So this basically showed that birds fly relative to the wind surrounding them, which is why you see birds flapping their wings in calm skies, but gliding when it's windy, letting the air take them.
Oh, wow.
Right? So it doesn't matter where the movement's coming from. It's all relative.
Wow.
The last chump of physics Leonardo had to embarrass would be Enlightenment scholar Daniel Bernoulli, discovering his namesake principle 300 years early. For normal people who don't think about these things, Bernoulli discovered that air that is moving faster exerts less pressure down on an object. Birds and airplane wings use this principle, having longer curved tops of the wings, which creates a lower pressure than the flat, straight bottom of the wing, giving it lift.
It is amazing that you're bringing this up, because I am not kidding. A week and a half ago, my father-in-law and I were talking about Bernoulli's principle, and all I really knew about it was how it relates to fans being put in front of windows, and it creates a better system if you take the fan away from the window a little bit.
I didn't know that.
And my father-in-law goes, "Oh, sure, but it's more importantly used in things like airplanes because," and he is a brilliant scientist, so he was able to explain it to me in a way that I was like, I think I get it.
Yeah.
But you're much smarter than me.
And Bernoulli principle is also used in singing. So
do tell.
Tones are, as we know, produced by the vocal cords and air passing through them to cause them to vibrate.
Okay.
And more air passing through it will cause a sort of a reduction in pressure, which causes a higher vibration, which is why we can sing high tones, which is why you feel like you're using lots of breath when you're singing low and you're running out of breath all the time. You know, this is something that I learned when I was doing opera in college. I probably butchered the explanation. My teacher would be very mad, but
that's still really crazy.
Yeah, the air pressure. It's also the same reason why objects get cold when you blow air on them, you know? So getting back to Leonardo, it's at the same time that he's working on the Sforza Horse that Leonardo finally has the resources to try to actually put a man in the sky. His first inventions seem awkward to the modern mind, but he does his best to resolve his greatest issue of flight, the method of propulsion. Like we talked about, the helicopter propeller worked great. In fact, there's a video of somebody using it on a drone. It creates less dust kick-up. I think we talked about this in one of the other episodes.
No. We didn't talk about any drone usage of it.
So somebody made Da Vinci's propellers. While it doesn't have the same lift sort of coefficient as a lighter propeller does, there's no dust kick-up when you use a Da Vinci propeller.
It's like a corkscrew, basically.
Because the air is kept right within the corkscrew.
Wow.
So there's less, like if you've ever been near a helicopter, there's wind blasting everywhere. The Da Vinci copter would not do that to nearly.
Because it's technically not a fan.
Yeah. So Da Vinci knew from his studies of the sort of muscular proportions of birds versus humans that we don't have the pec muscles to flap wings effectively, right? So, like I said, he's always come up with great methods to go through the air, but he's never really known how to
overcome that.
Make the engine, right?
Yeah.
The thing that actually moves it. His solution was to produce a contraption that would have the pilot pedaling his legs and arms simultaneously to flap what looked like dragonfly wings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So while I think that this design was completely outlandish, if you look at it, it kind of looks like a evil demon treadmill thing that like is trying to get you to lose 7 pounds an hour.
Okay.
I do have to give him credit for coming up with a creative solution, saying like, okay, we know how much energy each muscle can produce, so let's use all of the muscles at once and we'll probably be able to get ourselves in the air.
Wow.
His next idea would be far more bird-like, and it seemed that Da Vinci was fully confident that he would be successful. With the future twinkling in his eyes, he would write, quote, "The large bird will take its first flight from the back of the great swan, filling the universe with amazement, filling all writings with its fame, and bringing eternal glory to the nest where it was born." The Great Swan refers to Swan Mountain in Fiesole, where he hoped to take his first leap.
Okay.
While his budget for flights of fancy were pretty low at this point, Da Vinci set aside his personal funds to test one of his most famous bat-wing machines, Il Gran Nibbio, otherwise called Leonardo's Great Kite. Featuring a 30-foot wingspan of stretched cloth over a bat skeleton frame, Da Vinci believed that the bat would be a better model since it could be made much easier than trying to replicate thousands of feathers, which would ultimately be much heavier.
Okay.
Same thing goes with airplanes. We don't make feathers. In 1496, Leonardo would have his apprentice and friend, who I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Zoroaster da Peretola, fly Il Gran Nibbio. On the top of Swan Mountain, his apprentice would leap with the wings attached and glide in the air for several meters before falling and breaking his leg.
Oh.
Along with the machine.
Oh.
This is out of pocket money at this point. Not a lot of jobs are coming in. He's doing this just out of his own finances. And he's like, fly, bird, fly. And it like gets out in the air for a couple meters. It does fly for a second, then falls, breaks itself, breaks his front leg.
Before we move on really quickly, you mentioned a few seconds ago the kind of wing contraption being like a dragonfly.
Yeah. Well,
right?
That was the first one. The second one is a little bit more like a bat.
Okay. Well, the first one that's like a dragonfly, I know that you're not the biggest Dune person.
The ornithopter?
The ornithopter. Yeah. And it made me go, I wonder if Frank Herbert, years and years and years and years and years later, was looking through these things and went, dude, that's kind of a cool idea, and turned Da Vinci's idea into the ornithopter.
I don't know for sure, but if you guys want to check it out on the website, I would say that there is a kind of a similar situation. Okay. Instead of it looking like, an airplane body with dragonfly wings on the sides, it's more of like a treadmill with linkages where the dragonfly wings are right above your head.
Okay.
Right? So, like I said, at this point, tried the great kite. It broke. He was kind of out for cash.
Broke his leg.
The assistant broke his leg.
Poor guy.
As Da Vinci predicted, the human anatomy was incapable of manipulating wings efficiently. Without a modern motor, his design was simply underpowered. P.S. His assistant did recover to full health.
Oh, good.
So he's good. He was also kind of an interesting character. He was very into like mysticism and stuff, and Da Vinci hated it, but like he was like just a peasant guy. Microbio on him, just a peasant who found himself in Milan and was like, I'm going to go by Zoroaster, which is apparently some name of like some mystical priest in some biblical writing somewhere. And he just like was like, I am of high society. I do mystical arts. And he
very
just
cool.
kind of amused the court with that. But anyway,
really quickly, I also wanted to add, you bringing up the year, and I don't know why this just smacked my brain, but you said 1496, and I'm going, okay, so like 4 years after Columbus sailed to America?
Yes.
Unreal. Mm-hmm. I don't know why that's such a crazy thing to think that Columbus, and because Columbus was Italian, to think that him and Da Vinci were like in the same country at the same time.
Columbus was Italian, but I think he worked for Spain when he went to...
Correct. Okay. But he himself was it was either Spain or Portugal. I can't remember. You might be right about Spain. But just thinking that
it's very likely that he learned about the New World before he croaked.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So reading this sort of story about flight kind of filled me with a deep sense of resignation. Leonardo would study and understand the fundamental truths of flight hundreds of years into the future, and despite that, he was unable to soar through the sky. He knew in his heart and mind that it could happen, but his budget was limited, and he lived in a world that was too far in the past to recognize how right he was. If there was anyone who deserved to take the first flight besides the Wright brothers, it would have been Leonardo. While La Gran Nibbio would be a failure, he would never give up on his dream of flight.
He reminds me of Nelly Furtado. I'm like a bird, I want to fly away. I don't know where my home is.
I'm not going to say anything. I just want you to sing the rest.
I don't know where my
Listeners,
soul is.
Here, 3 minutes. I'll give it to you. Okay, I have some mercy. I'll keep reading. Okay, so 2 years after Leonardo's first flying attempt, it would seem that the vibrant environment that Milan offered 16 years ago was beginning to flicker and diminish. The French's advance into Italian territory had gone on for a few years now, and the chances of Leonardo immortalizing his sculpture in bronze was pretty much gone. Oh. As far as work goes, the city was beginning to dry up for artists. Leonardo would go from working his biggest jobs to painting decorations in the Sforza castle and trying to find side jobs. As the war dragged on across Italy, Ludovico Sforza would start shortchanging Leonardo.
Oof.
In a ripped-up letter that Leonardo drafted to the Duke's bookkeeper, he mentions that Ludovico hasn't paid his regular wages for the better part of 2 years, writing, quote, "Perhaps your excellency didn't give further orders to pay me, thinking I had money enough, and it vexes me greatly that having to earn my living has forced me to interrupt the work and attend to small matters, instead of following up with the work your lordship entrusted me." Oof. Soon enough, there would be bigger fish to fry. In 1499, Louis XII of France would invade Milan, leaving Da Vinci without enough time to escape. Da Vinci would take his cash savings, and after giving some of his attendants and his boyfriend Salai some money, he would hide the rest in envelopes around his studio. When the French finally arrived, they would tear through the houses and shops of almost all of his friends, looting whatever they wanted. While Leonardo was fortunate enough to be spared, a devastating blow would come to him when the French archers would use Da Vinci's clay horse sculpture for target practice, destroying it completely.
Jeez.
Yeah, so that clay sculpture that Maximilian I saw on his wedding day has been destroyed because a bunch of soldiers were like, I should shoot that.
So, okay, I can ask now. Is that the period on the sculpture? Is it done, or is there more?
Several years later, Beatrice d'Este's father would send an attendant to the French forces so that he could have the last existing mold of the statue. But unfortunately, that would also be destroyed. Despite this, Leonardo's greatest sculpture would still come to life 500 years later.
Really?
In 1977, a United Airlines pilot from Allenstown, Pennsylvania, would read a National Geographic magazine covering the story of Leonardo's lost horse sculpture. The pilot, named Charles C. Dent, would go on to study Leonardo's work and try to recreate the Sforza horse in his hometown. After founding the nonprofit aptly named Leonardo da Vinci's Horse Incorporated, he would round
Leo's Horse Inc.
After doing that, he would round up a group of scholars and sculptors to undertake a project that would end up costing $2.5 million to complete.
That is way less than I would have expected.
Yeah.
But it's also 1977, so maybe that has something to do with it.
The process would end up taking decades, but thanks to sculptors Garth Herrick and Nina Akamu, the first casting in full scale would be made, synthesizing pages of Leonardo's notes to make his most faithful reproduction of Da Vinci's work as possible. The first casting now sits at the Hippodrome in San Siro in Milan, having been unveiled on September 10th, 1999.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So, it is to scale?
To scale.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Now, if you don't have a chance to visit Italy, don't worry. The sculptors from the nonprofit would make multiple copies with the exact same casting ending up at the Frederick Major Gardens and Sculpture Park in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a sculpture park in Grand Rapids. You can visit it and it'll be the same exact sculpture that they have in Milan.
Because it's the same mold and everything?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Personally, I can't picture how happy Leonardo would be finding out that a guy whose job it was to fly through the skies would actually study his own sculptures and make the horse that he wanted to make, that he worked on for 17 years before it got destroyed.
Yeah. It really is. That's amazing.
Yeah. So jumping back to Da Vinci just after the invasion, Leonardo would be surprised to find that despite these stupid soldiers having fun shooting his horse, the French were actually protective of him and loved his work. When the French King Louis XII would visit the Last Supper, he would even ask his engineers if it was possible to remove it from the church and have it shipped back to France. Now, despite the initial commotion, Leonardo would stay in Florence with the French instead of fleeing.
Okay.
Yeah. He would spend the next few months finishing up projects and planning his next commissions, but what truly scared him enough to leave was actually news that his old boss, the Bloody Duke of Milan, was planning to take the city back from King Louis by any means necessary. So this led for Leonardo da Vinci, now 47 years old, to pack up his work in some covered wagons and return to his old stomping ground of Florence after 18 years.
Wow.
And that's where we'll pick up for part 5 of Leonardo da Vinci.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah.
18 years in Milan. Now he's back to Florence.
Mm-hmm.
Dang, dude.
I feel like we covered so much in this one, little hour episode.
We did. I mean, hey, the Last Supper alone, I feel like probably there could be a whole podcast series on it. Almost.
Yeah, they're books, man. There are entire volumes just on the Last Supper. In fact, there are entire volumes on the Vitruvian Man. Kenneth Clark, who's the sort of premier scholar for Da Vinci, writes an entire book just on the Vitruvian Man.
That's crazy.
Also, learning about him flying, learning about the horse monument. I really love the fact, and I know it's not the same as Da Vinci actually making it. I understand that. But the fact that that horse had been worked on for a decade by one of the greatest minds of the Renaissance. Got completely destroyed for a stupid reason. Right. So stupid. There was even a mold that they took of it. The clay got destroyed, but there was still a mold that they took of it that they could have used. And the French never gave it back. It just got lost to history. But somehow, some guy in the 70s was reading Nat Geo and said, we should bring this back. And started a foundation. Found people who analyzed hundreds of drawings of horses to make the Sforza Horse monument. And if you look at it, it is seriously incredible. And the scale of it is astonishing. The fact that Da Vinci was like, yeah, we can do this.
It's crazy.
So,
well, once again, my friend, fantastisch.
Thank you.
Fantastisch.
Thank you. For those of you who are on the other side of this, I'll have you know, Daniel is going to do a great job editing this one.
Akiva is for everybody out there, he is very hard on himself when it comes to the work that he's producing here, which is, to me, a good thing. Obviously, you want to make the best work that you can, and it's indicative of how much he cares. But I keep trying to tell him, I'm like, buddy, relax, you're doing great.
No.
And, he has it in his head that he's like doing a terrible job, or that his...
Yeah.
It's sort of, you remind me of, I can't remember what the movie is. Maybe it's like Step Brothers, where Will Ferrell's like, what do I do with my hands? I don't know what to do with my hands.
That's literally me.
That it feels like that's you with your voice. You're like, am I talking weird? Am I like, there's space between my words. Is that bad? I'm like, you're talking. That's how talking works. Well, again, great job, man. We'll wrap it up here. First of all, thanks everybody for listening, like always. But a couple things to go over before we say goodbye for today. Number one, like we said at the very top of the podcast, if anybody is able to support us on Patreon, go check us out there, patreon.com/thebiographers. You can also find us on social media. We're going to be on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It's generally just going to be at The Biographers, with the exception of Instagram, which is at the.biographers. But it's generally pretty easy for us to find. And recently, we've actually been kind of, not necessarily blowing up, that's not a fair way to say it, but we've been
picking up some steam.
Picking up some steam for sure on the social medias. We've been trying to make a lot more videos for everybody, just kind of getting people interested generally in the podcast.
If y'all found us on social, please send us a message. We want to know if the outreach is, because it's one thing to have somebody like our videos, but it's another thing for them to follow us on TikTok and then actually listen to the full podcast.
Absolutely.
Love to hear from those folks.
And I would also say for anybody that's out there, even if you just have questions for us, we do try to occasionally do these what we call office hours episodes, where we just, first of all, have casual conversation, but then we address errors that we've made in the past, or if I asked or if Akiva asked a question in a previous series, we'll try to answer that question in those episodes. But if anybody does have any personal questions, if you're just, listening through one of these series and you go, hey, actually, I was curious about one of these inventions by Leonardo da Vinci, shoot us an email. That's going to be thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our best to answer any and all questions that come our way. Let's see here. Next big one. Everybody go check out metalworkbymiola.com. That's Akiva's website, where he is slanging his knives, his blades.
Yes, sir.
Usually they're going to be chef's knives. So if anybody is interested in getting an amazing, custom, handmade, hand-forged chef's knife, we're not talking stock removal. We're talking about handmade Damascus knives and Sanmai knives and all different types of cool stuff. Go check out Metalwork by Miola. His last name is spelled MEOLA.com. You can actually use the code biographers at checkout to get 10% off of your order. Anything else?
I think you hit it all.
Yeah, we're good.
I really appreciate everybody listening. I hope you guys are enjoying Da Vinci. This has been one of my proudest moments as a writer, and I hope you guys are enjoying.
I do too. And again, Akiva, you're being too hard on yourself, because I think you're doing a fantastic job. You're entertaining me anyways.
Well, that's good.
And I feel like I'm not the easiest person. Well, I don't know. I'm fairly easy to entertain, but not sincerely, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that people will go, oh, did you like that? And in my mind, I'm like, but I'll go, yeah, it was great. Because I don't want to fight him on it anymore. I'm just sort of over that part of my life.
Yeah.
So I think you're doing a fantastic job. But we'll end it there. And like I always like to say, remember everyone, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.